The worst thing isn't being abandoned, the worst thing is waking up years later and wondering if, somehow, you deserved it. My son said he'd be back in a week. He looked me straight in the eye when he said it. No hesitation, no shame, just a simple promise, spoken like a fact. That was 15 years ago. He showed up late that evening, the kind of autumn night where the cold sneaks in quietly and settles deep in your bones. But leaves clung to his boots, the porch light flickered like it always did, and behind him were the kids. One was clinging to his jacket sleeve, the other was already asleep in his arms. They were too quiet. Children are never that quiet unless something's wrong. Dad, he said, still standing in the doorway. I need your help. When a grown man calls you dad again, you know he's not asking for advice, he's asking for rescue. He spoke fast, like he was afraid if he slowed down, the truth might catch him. Divorce, job trouble, a move out of state, everything sounded rushed, unfinished. Excuses that hadn't been rehearsed enough to hold weight. Just for a week, he said, maybe 2. I need to straighten things out. The kids will be better off with you, you know that. I didn't know that. I had always been the place people landed when the rest of their lives collapsed. The kids stepped inside without taking off their coats. That's when I noticed the stitching on the younger one's sleeve, a tear crudely sewn shut with black thread. The kind of thing you only notice when your gut has already started whispering that something isn't right. You sure? I asked. You can stay. We can talk this through. No, he said too quickly. This is better, simpler. Simpler for who? He didn't say. He didn't even stay for coffee. He kissed the kids on their heads, awkward, rushed, like he was afraid of lingering too long, and grabbed his bag. Just one bag, no suitcases, no toys, no plan. I watched from the window as his car pulled away and disappeared down the street. And that's when the thought hit me, sharp and unwelcome. What if he doesn't come back? The week passed quietly, too quietly. I packed lunches, walked them to school, cooked dinners, answered their questions as gently as I could. Will Dad call tonight? Soon, I said. He's just busy. 2 weeks later, I called him. His phone was disconnected. A month later, the number didn't exist anymore. I sent letters. They came back unopened. I asked around. People shrugged. And then there was the night I still see clearly. No matter how many years pass, the kids were asleep. I was sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at a crack in the old countertop, when it hit me all at once. I had no idea what the right thing was anymore. If I reported him missing, they'd ask why I waited. If I didn't, they'd ask why I hid the children. And the thought that wouldn't leave me alone was this: what if he walked back in tomorrow and accused me of stealing his kids? That night, I didn't sleep. It was the first time I understood that love and fear can live in the same chest, and tear a man apart from the inside. I loved those kids, even then. But I didn't know if I had the right to. The next morning, I walked them to school, smiled like everything was fine, and promised myself I'd fix it, I'd find him, I'd make it right. Somehow, 15 years later, my son stood at that same door again. Only this time, he wasn't alone, and he wasn't asking for help. That was when I realized the night at the kitchen table hadn't been the worst part, it had only been the beginning. The story I'd been avoiding all those years had simply waited, until I was old enough, tired enough, and attached enough for it to finally come back and collect what it was owed. There's a lie people tell themselves when they're trying to survive. They say this is temporary, even when deep down they know it isn't, at first. I kept my son's room the way he left it, the old dresser, the crooked picture frame, a jacket he never bothered to take. I told myself it was practical. Proof, maybe, that he still belonged here. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid that if I cleared the room, I'd be admitting something I wasn't ready to say out loud. The kids didn't call me Grandpa for a while. They used my name. Then one day, without ceremony, the younger one slipped and called me Dad. His eyes widened like he'd broken something fragile. I didn't correct him. I also didn't answer right away. That hesitation still haunts me. Years don't pass evenly. Some rush by unnoticed. Others drag, heavy and loud. I learned the difference raising 2 children who weren't supposed to be mine. School forms came home asking for a father's signature. Doctors' offices asked questions I didn't know how to answer. I learned to say, their father is unavailable, because it sounded better than he disappeared. Every choice felt like walking across thin ice. If I applied for legal guardianship, I risked someone asking why I hadn't done it sooner. If I didn't, I risked losing them entirely if someone else did the asking first, so I did what scared men often do. I stayed quiet and hoped time would forgive me. The kids grew, birthdays stacked up, first broken bones, first heartbreaks, late night talks at the kitchen table where they asked questions I couldn't dodge anymore. Did he leave because of us? That one came from the older boy, staring at his plate like it held the answer. No, I said, and meant it, but I also didn't know if it was true. I searched for my son, not loudly, not officially, just enough to quiet my conscience. Old coworkers, distant relatives, addresses that led nowhere. Each dead end made it easier to believe he wanted to stay gone, and that belief carried a terrible comfort, because as the years passed, a harder truth began to settle in, the kind no decent parent wants to face. The kids were better off without him. I hated myself for thinking it, I still do, but it crept in slowly, wrapped in ordinary moments, homework done on time, calm dinners, no shouting, no slammed doors, no long absences explained away with lies. We had stability, and stability has a way of making you protective, even possessive. By the time they were teenagers, the questions changed. What would he think of me now? Do you think he'd recognize us? I didn't answer those right away. I watched their faces instead, looked for hope, looked for anger, found both. At night, when the house was quiet, the doubt came back. It always did. Did I do enough to find him? Did I do too much by staying? If he walked through that door tomorrow, would I even have the right to say no? 15 years is a long time to live in the middle of a question. I aged faster than I expected, my hands stiffened, my back ached in the mornings, the kids started driving me instead of the other way around, and somewhere along the way, I realized something that frightened me more than any court or accusation ever could. If he came back now, I would fight him, not with words, not with fists, but with everything I had left in me. That realization didn't make me proud, it made me careful, because love, once it's earned the hard way, doesn't give itself up easily. The night before everything changed, I found myself standing in the hallway, listening to the kids talk in their rooms, laughing, arguing, living. I thought about how many nights had missed, how many chances had burned without even knowing it, and for the first time, another thought crept in, darker than the rest. What if he comes back not because he wants them but because he wants something from me? I didn't sleep much that night. The next afternoon, there was a knock at the door, not loud, not hesitant, confident. I opened it expecting a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, I saw my son, older, thinner, sharper around the edges, and beside him stood a man in a clean suit, holding a folder like it weighed nothing at all. "This won't take long," the man said calmly. My son didn't look at the house, didn't look past me, didn't ask about the kids. He looked at me like a stranger who'd been keeping something that belonged to him, and in that moment, every quiet doubt I'd carried for 15 years finally had a voice, because whatever this was, it wasn't about family anymore. There are many ways a man can return to a place he abandoned. My son chose the one that left no room for conversation. The man beside him stepped forward first, mid-40s, calm eyes, the kind of voice trained to sound reasonable no matter what it's saying. "My name is Mr. Harlan," he said. "I represent your son. We're here regarding the unlawful retention of his minor children." The words landed heavier than I expected. Unlawful retention, not misunderstanding, not family matter, a crime, neatly folded into legal language. My son still hadn't looked past me. "They're not minors anymore," I said quietly. That finally made him flinch. "They were when you took them," he replied. His voice was flat, practiced. "You had no legal right to keep them." The house felt smaller with him standing there, like the walls remembered him better than I did. "I didn't take them," I said. "You left them, Mr. Harlan raised a hand, polite but firm. "We're not here to debate memories. We're here to establish facts. Your son has filed a petition claiming you deliberately concealed the children and denied him contact for 15 years. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was unreal. "Did you try to contact them?" I asked my son. His eyes finally moved, drifting past me toward the hallway, toward the rooms where his children were doing homework, unaware that their lives were being dragged into a courtroom before dinner. "That's not relevant," he said. "It told me everything." 2 days later, the papers arrived, thick, precise, cold. They described me as manipulative, controlling, A man who exploited a vulnerable situation to erase a father from his children's lives. I read every page twice. By the end, my hands were shaking. The kids found me sitting at the table with the documents spread out like evidence at a crime scene. Is he trying to take us? The older one asked. I opened my mouth, closed it, then said the hardest thing I could manage. He's trying to change what the law thinks happened. That night, I called a lawyer, a woman recommended by a neighbor who didn't ask many questions, just listened. You're in a difficult position, she said after an hour. You acted out of necessity. But necessity doesn't always hold up in court, especially after this much time. So what happens? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Worst case? She said carefully. The court orders reunification, gradual at first, supervised. But yes, they could decide he deserves a chance. I hung up and sat in the dark long after the house went quiet. Because here was the truth I hadn't said out loud yet. I wasn't afraid of losing the case. I was afraid of what winning would cost. The hearing was scheduled faster than I expected. Family court moves quickly when children are involved. Even when those children are old enough to vote, my son arrived. Early, he wore a clean jacket, his hair trimmed, his posture straight. He looked like a man who had rehearsed remorse in front of a mirror. When he spoke well. He talked about shame, about being overwhelmed, about leaving temporarily and losing his footing, about trying to return and being shut out, about a father who decided he knew better. I watched the judge listen, I watched the nods, then it was my turn. I told the truth. All of it. I admitted my fear, my hesitation, my silence. I didn't pretend I'd handled everything perfectly. I made choices. I said not to erase him, but to protect them. The judge's eyes softened slightly. Slightly wasn't enough. Then something unexpected happened. The judge leaned forward and asked a question no one had prepared for. Would the children like to speak? My son stiffened. His lawyer frowned. The kids stood together. No notes, no coaching. The younger one spoke first. He didn't keep us, he said, nodding toward me. He stayed. The room went very still. The older one followed. We waited, he said, for years. Then we stopped. Not because he told us to, but because he never came. My son finally looked at them then, really looked, and for the first time since had returned, I saw something crack. The judge called a recess. When we stood to leave the room, my son leaned close enough that only I could hear him. You turned them against me, he said. I met his eyes. No, I said, you did that yourself. The ruling would come later, the judge said so plainly. But as we walked out, I understood something with painful clarity. This wasn't about custody, it wasn't about the past, it was about control, and a man who couldn't stand that the life he abandoned had learned how to live without him. And no matter what the court decided, I wasn't finished with my son yet. Courts have a sound to them, not noise, absence, a hollow quiet where every word feels heavier than it should. The judge took longer than I expected. 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks of waiting for a decision that would decide whether 15 years of ordinary life counted for anything at all. During that time, my son tried to reinsert himself like nothing had happened. He sent messages, not to me, to them, long, careful texts about regret and missed birthdays, apologies wrapped in explanations, promises that sounded better written than they ever would out loud. The kids showed me the messages without being asked. I don't know what he wants from us, the older one said. An apology? Or obedience? I didn't answer. I was afraid my voice would betray too much. The court date came on a gray morning that felt older than it should have. My son sat straight back beside his lawyer, hands folded, looking every bit like a man who had practiced humility. I sat alone. The kids sat behind me, close enough that I could feel their presence like a steadying hand. The judge spoke carefully, slowly, the way people do when they know words can break things. She acknowledged the father's rights, his absence, his failures. She acknowledged my role, the good and the questionable. Then she said the sentence that split the room in two: the children will remain where they are. My chest tightened, but she continued, the court encourages a path toward reconciliation, supervised contact, counseling, time. My son nodded immediately, like he'd already won something. The kids didn't. Outside the courtroom, my son approached them. He crouched slightly, trying to meet their eyes like he remembered how. I'm not going anywhere again, he said, I swear. The younger one looked at him for a long moment. You already did, he said quietly. That night, The house felt different, not relieved, not safe, just altered. The visit started a month later, a neutral room, a counselor present, small talk pretending to be healing. My son brought photos of himself from the years had been gone, jobs had had, cities had lived in. A life that hadn't included them. He spoke like a man explaining a gap in his resume. The kids listened politely, carefully, like people learning a language they might never use. After the third visit, the older one said something that stopped me cold. He doesn't want to know us, he said. He wants us to forgive him so he can forgive himself. I didn't correct him. My son grew impatient. He complained about the pace, about the counselor, about me. He said I was influencing them, poisoning them against him. Refusing to step aside. You've already taken 15 years, he said to me once, his voice low. How much more do you need? I looked at him then, really looked, and saw something I hadn't wanted to name before. He didn't miss his children, he missed being absolved. The breaking point came quietly. During one visit, he told the younger one, "You could live with me, I have a place now, a real place." The counselor stopped the session immediately. That night, both kids sat at the kitchen table, pale and shaken. He didn't ask us, the younger one said. He just assumed. Something in me hardened then, not anger, resolution. I called my lawyer the next morning. "I'm done trying to be fair," I said, "and going to be honest." The next hearing was shorter, sharper. The kids spoke again, not with emotion, not with rehearsed lines, just clarity. "We don't hate him," the older one said, "but we don't trust him." The judge listened, and this time, she didn't hesitate. Contact would continue, but on the children's terms, no pressure, no promises, no assumptions. My son didn't argue, he just stared at me as if something had finally slipped out of reach. "In the hallway," he said it, "you won." I shook my head. "No," I said, "they did." That was the moment I understood something I wish I'd learned earlier in life. You don't finish raising children when they grow up, you finish when you stop protecting them. And I wasn't finished yet. Some endings don't come with relief, they come with clarity. And that can be harder to live with. After the court made its final ruling, life didn't snap back into place. There was no clean reset, no quiet return to how things were before. My son came back with papers and accusations. What we had now was something thinner, more fragile, a piece that required attention. The kids settled into it faster than I did. They went back to school, made plans, talked about futures that didn't orbit around courtrooms or counseling rooms. Sometimes they mentioned their father, sometimes they didn't. When they did, it was careful, almost clinical. Like talking about whether that might turn bad without warning. My son kept asking for more time, more access, more trust. Every request sounded reasonable on its own. Taken together, they felt like pressure. One evening, months after the last hearing, he showed up unannounced. No lawyer this time, no folder, just him, standing on the porch like a man trying to remember how to knock on a door that used to be his. "They're not here," I said before he could ask. "Out with friends." He nodded, as if he'd already known. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd spent so many nights questioning myself. He looked around, taking in the familiar details, the worn chair, the small crack in the counter, like he was measuring what had lost. "You could have told me," he said finally. "You could have come looking harder." "I did," I said, "just not the way you wanted." He leaned forward, frustration creeping back into his voice. "You let them believe I didn't care." I met his eyes. "No," I said quietly, "I let them believe what they lived." That stopped him. For a moment, he looked tired, older than his years, and I almost felt the urge to soften things, to give him something that sounded like forgiveness. But I didn't, because forgiveness offered too early isn't mercy, it's permission. "I'm not your enemy," he said. "I know," I answered, "but I'm not your shield anymore either." He stood to leave without another word. At the door, he hesitated. "You think they'll ever forgive me?" he asked, not turning around. "That's not for me to decide," I said, and it never was. When the door closed behind him, the house didn't feel empty, it felt honest. Later that night, the kids came home laughing, loud and alive, carrying the careless energy of people who know they're safe. I watched them from the hallway and felt something settle in my chest. Not pride exactly, not relief, certainty. I had made mistakes, plenty of them. I waited too long. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I chose stability over legality and hoped the world would understand. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But here is the truth Eve earned the hard way. Being a parent isn't about who arrives first or who has the strongest claim, it's about who stays when leaving would be easier, and who carries the weight when no one is watching. My son still exists in their lives, at the edges, where he belongs for now. Maybe one day that will change. Maybe it won't. What matters is this: I didn't take his children, I kept them, and if that makes me the villain in his story, I can live with that, because in theirs, the ones who mattered most, I was the man who didn't walk away when just for a week turned into a lifetime. Some debts aren't paid in courtrooms, they're paid in years, and am finished paying mine.